Annie, what in the world are you most afraid of?
Demons, disembodied voices, and my mother. Will, what in the world are you most afraid of?
Witches, poltergeists, and scripted podcast trailers. Come with us each week as we face our fears and bring you a terrifying, bizarre, and hilarious tale from the paranormal, narrated by two middle-aged humans who drag each other.
Almost from the moment of Lesh's death, St. Mary's, Heffron Hall, named after the bishop whom Leshes had tried to kill, reportedly became a hotbed of paranormal activity. It began with phantom footsteps, heard roaming the third floor, accompanied by the sound of a tapping cane.
Liza Minnelli was now doing a show in the asylum. Hey, it's Liza. Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard.
Oh, you cretin. This is giving me the absolute fears.
Maybe you're the cretin, Annie Gann, and I'll be coming for you. Cannibals, like, imagine eating somebody else.
Yeah, I wouldn't go near you for eating. You'd be awful stringy.
You'd be like, they cook you and everyone would be like, oh, this meat's gone off, isn't it?
So if you enjoy a little weirdness and just the occasional catfight, we might have just the show for you.
You can listen to Mysteries of the Unexplained on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Mysteries of the Unexplained and come join the dark side.
Join our Facebook and Instagram at Mysteries of the Unexplained.
Also, we want your spooky stories. Send them to motustories@gmail.com and get them read out on the show.
Also, we'll sing Celine Dion.
The Oracle Network.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. As always, I'm your host, Paige. I usually do somewhat of a monologue in the beginning, but this time I did so near the end. This was not an easy case to write, and I know a lot of my fellow Mississippians have been asking for it. I'm not sure if you'll be upset with me or still love me by the end of this episode. A ton of this episode was compiled from public court records. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. During World War II, Tom Tardy created the Tardy Furniture Company in Winona, Mississippi on Front Street. There was a woman named Bertha who was the decorator for the store for a very long time. Eventually, Tom sold the Tardy store in 1985 to Bertha. She and Tom had become lovebirds, and in 1994 the two got married. However, around the time they got married, downtown Winona wasn't full of activity and it just wasn't booming with shoppers as it used to be. Many of the stores along Front Street even closed down. The Tardy store was still there though, with its showroom full of all kinds of pretty furniture that people could see through the windows as they strolled by. On the morning of July 16, 1996, Bertha Tardy made a phone call to one of the retired employees, Sam Jones Jr. She had a favor to ask. She wondered if Sam would go to the furniture store and help Derek Stewart and Robert Golden. They were the new guys, and Bertha knew that she could count on Sam to teach them how to load and unload furniture properly. Sam agreed to go to the store and made his way to the company. From the outside, everything looked fine at 9:45 that morning. Sam went inside and he walked around the showroom. He walked by a bunch of chairs and floor lamps, and nothing appeared to be off at first, but suddenly Sam heard something awful. He testified later, quote, "The noise was like somebody trying to catch their breath. I walked on a little further and I heard it again. I looked down and I saw what it was." End quote. What he looked down and saw was a dreadful and disturbing scene. Sam was startled as he was now seeing the deceased bodies of 59-year-old Bertha Tardy, 16-year-old Derek Bobo Stewart, 42-year-old Robert Golden, and 45-year-old Carmen Rigby. Now, before I go any further, I want to tell you a little more about the victims. They tend to get lost in the mix of this hectic case, which is heavily focused on if they have the right man or not for over 20 years. The following information about the victims are from findagrave.com and the Clarion Ledger. Bertha Marie Bennett Tardy was born on May 8, 1937 to Cecil Bennett and Mattie Grantham. Bertha attended Winona High School, where she graduated. She also graduated from the New York School of Interior Design. She was very active at her church, Moore Memorial United Methodist, where she also was a chairperson of the Finance Committee for half a decade. She also taught children at the church as leader of its Commission on Education and as bookkeeper of the United Methodist Women. Bertha was so engaged with the community in so many ways. She was at one time the president of the board of directors for the Montgomery County Habitat for Humanity, but eventually she went back to being a member and head of the selection board. Bertha had been an accountant and president of the Montgomery County Economic Council and a member of Leadership Mississippi. In 1989, Bertha was recognized as the Retail Person of the Year. She was the president of the Downtown Merchants Association, where she organized and directed getting grant money together to revamp downtown Winona. At the time of her death, Bertha and Tom had a daughter named Roxanne and one grandson, Jeremy. Robert Lee Golden was born on the same day as I was, August 13th. The year he was born was 1953. He was a member of Pink Flower Baptist Church. Robert graduated Winona High School in 1973. He went to Mississippi Valley State University and graduated from there in 1977. At the time, he was married to Shirley Golden, and they had 2 boys, Christopher and Randy. Shirley passed away in 2012. Robert had just started working at the furniture store and worked a full-time job in Grenada, all to support his wife and their 2 sons. He was a quiet man who did not have a lot of free time on his hands, but any free time he did have, he really loved playing pool. Carmen Briscoe Rigby was born on April 1st, 1951, to parents Mary Catherine and Luther. She had been working at the furniture store for 20 years. At the time of her death, she was married to Benny Rigby. She was a member of Community Baptist Church. Carmen and Benny had 2 sons who were teenagers at the time, named Benji and Brian. A local resident said that Carmen was a cheerful and soft-spoken friend, quote, the kind of person who was always smiling, always laughing, end quote. Derek Everett Stewart, known as Bobo, was born on May 24, 1980 to his parents Randy and Kathy. The teenager went to Shiloh Baptist Church, close to Vaden, Mississippi. At Winona High School, he was active in sports, playing shortstop and pitcher for the school baseball team. Derek was their leading hitter. He was also a member of FCA, VICA, as well as the Gifted Art Club. As a freshman in high school, he went to Winona Academy, and there his superlatives were most handsome, most athletic, and Mr. Junior Winona Academy. He loved playing football for the high school. He also had a brother named Dale. After Derek's death, his coach said, quote, he loved life, I don't have a son, but if I had a son, I'd want him to be like Derek. End quote. So that's what I could find on the 4 victims. When Sam looked down at the floor, he saw 16-year-old Derek, one of the delivery guys Sam was supposed to be training, laid out in a puddle of blood. The other delivery man, Robert, was hunched over alongside a counter right beside Derek. Carmen was on her stomach, face down with a plaid sofa right behind her. She still had her car keys on her pinky finger. Bertha was closer to the back office, lying there, and Sam remembered the bottom of her shoes were facing him. Sam was in complete disbelief, but once he snapped back into reality to realize that this wasn't a nightmare, he took off to a business close by and he started begging employees to phone the police and an ambulance quick. Johnny Hargrove, the chief police at the time, who was an ex-Army sergeant, arrived in less than a minute because he had been patrolling the area. He took one look at the scene with the 16-year-old still faintly gurgling and immediately called for backup. Everyone you can think of was asked to come help, from MedStat, the coroner, the district attorney, as well as the Mississippi Highway Patrol and the Mississippi Crime Lab. One of the first officers to arrive was Kenny Townsend. He saw the chief looking nervous and out of sorts, understandably. Police Chief Johnny Hargrove instructed Kenny to get inside and search for 76-year-old Tom Hardy. Tom would still spend a lot of his mornings in the store with Bertha, and everyone feared that he would be found somewhere deceased too. The chief also told Officer Kenny to, quote, "Draw your weapon, it's the real shit," end quote. After searching the store for the perpetrator and Tom Hardy, the store was completely empty besides the 2 of them and the 4 bodies on the ground. When paramedics got there, they got 16-year-old Derek on a stretcher and whisked him away to a hospital nearby. Police were quickly wrapping tape around the scene so onlookers who were gathering around couldn't contaminate the scene. But this didn't quite work. A lot of people went in and out of the crime scene, even an animal control officer. As the investigation was happening, the conclusion was that the people murdered were all shot with a .380 caliber pistol. 1 live round was found by a bookshelf, and 5 shell casings were taken into evidence. Put a pin in the live round, which was found by the bookshelf. It suggests that the gun jammed, which will be very important towards the end of the episode. Also, each person had been shot in the head. The floor was brown tile, and there were a few light, bloody footprints by Derek's baseball cap. An investigator inspected the bottom of Sam Jones's shoes and studied the treads just in case. The footprints were not his. It just so happened that on July 15th, the day before this massacre, Curtis's uncle, Doyle Simpson, had his .380 caliber pistol stolen from his car. This is when Curtis Flowers was taken in for questioning the afternoon of the slayings. He was not under arrest, and when asked if he would take a gun residue test, he complied with no hesitation. The questioning area was inside of the furniture store at a dining table. Later in the afternoon, people started to show up across the street. It began to rain heavily, but they stayed to pray. They began to wail and cry when they saw Robert, Carmen, and Bertha being taken out of the furniture store. Officer Kenny Townsend supposedly filled out an incident report, but later it was mysteriously lost. There was no concrete evidence that connected anyone to this horrible crime. Keep that in mind, too. Fingerprints and DNA did not match any suspects. All they had to go off of were shoe prints and bullets. No gun, no actual shoes. There didn't seem to be a motive at all, which was terrifying to the residents of Winona. This panic that a killer was on the loose caused the town to want someone arrested as soon as possible. This fright and urgency to lock someone up for this terrible crime could have been what led to pinning this on an innocent person. Now, before I go any further, I do want to talk about today's sponsor. I want to thank Keen for sponsoring today's episode. I'm so beyond excited to tell y'all about Keen because this is right up my alley and probably some of yours too. Keen gives you access to vetted psychics and spiritual advisors who will give you guidance and understanding on life's challenges, clarity in love, relationships, your career, and so much more. Keen has anything you may be looking for, such as tarot card readings, clearing your chakras, psychics, and many other awesome advisors that are professionals in whatever you are looking for. Keen's advisors are on call 24/7. There's always someone online and you can schedule so easily with an advisor. Now, as a new Keen customer, you can try your first 10 minutes for only $1.99 at trykeen.com/truecrime. That's KEEN.com/truecrime. Pricing depends on the advisor you choose, and the services are backed with a satisfaction guarantee. Keen is the most affordable way to meet spiritual advisors, and when you find the right one, you'll develop an ongoing relationship with them that leads to so many benefits, such as a monthly intention setting, gaining clarity on the significance of synchronicities, clearing your chakras, and so much more. You guys will want to give Keen a try. Every week, Keen will send its users a discount on readings. This makes Keen one of the most cost-effective ways to get so many readings. If you're a current Keen user, or plan to be in the future, you'll want to check your email each week for your discount. I want to thank Keen again for sponsoring the podcast. Go to trykeen.com/truecrime and get your first 10 minutes for only $1.99. That's trykeen.com/truecrime. I'd love to hear about your experience with Keen. trykeen.com/truecrime. The link will also be available in the show notes. State Trooper Tommy Purnell said he knew how stressed out the police chief was, saying, quote, "The pressure was on him pretty good. He needed a lead right then to satisfy those people, and he didn't have one," end quote. A few months later, in September, Curtis moved to Texas. The investigation was still ongoing, and eventually, after it was finished, Curtis was taken into custody and transferred back to Mississippi. When he came back, the state decided to indict Curtis separately on a charge of capital murder of all 4 victims. Bertha Tardy's murder was taken to trial separately from the others. He was going to trial for wearing the same type of shoe and eyewitness statements that we know can be wrong. And all of this is circumstantial evidence, which I'll get into shortly. There was a request for the venue to be changed, and it was allowed. The trial started on October 13, 1997 in Lee County. There were more than 20 witnesses called by the state to testify. The first witness was Johnny Hargrove. During his testimony, he also identified pictures that showed bloody footprints at the scene. Later on, investigators found these footprints were from a Fila Grant Hill size 10.5 sneaker. Curtis wore a size 11. Certified crime scene analyst with the Mississippi Crime Lab, Melissa Schoen, took the stand. She testified that she found 5 casings from a .380 caliber pistol. Curtis's uncle Doyle Simpson testified that on the morning of the murders, he was at work. He had gotten to his job at Angelica's around 6:15 that morning. That same morning is when his .380 caliber pistol was stolen out of his car. Many witnesses took the stand saying they saw Curtis walking towards Angelica's around 7:15 that morning, and that he was leaning on Doyle's car between 7 and 7:30. The investigators concluded that one of the bullets that was lodged into a mattress at the crime scene was the same bullet from Doyle's gun. All the bullets recovered from the scene were said to have come from the same gun owned by Doyle. Immediately, this was looking bad for Curtis. Could this all have been a terrible coincidence? Was the wrong man on trial? Or did Curtis do this? Well, things only started to look worse when Curtis was just being honest about the connection between himself and the Tardy Furniture Company during his questioning, which was brought up in trial. Mississippi Highway Patrolman Jack Matthews testified that Curtis was called in for questioning since he used to work at Tardy's. He started working there on June 29th. Curtis said that on July 3rd, he was asked to go get some batteries from a business that was also in Winona. The batteries fell out of the truck and were not going to be able to be used, so the company let Curtis know he would have to pay for those batteries, which was going to be around $300 and $500. Curtis never went back to work after this, and the last time he had any communication with the company was on July 9th, when Bertha told him that he was fired. Curtis said that Bertha Tardy gave him $30 out of his last paycheck, but she took the rest to pay for the batteries that were destroyed. Matthews went on to testify about what he found on the accounting sheet in a drawer at the furniture company. On the sheet, somewhere between $300 and $400 was missing from the cash drawer the morning that the 4 were gunned down. Curtis was then living at his girlfriend Connie Moore Flowers' house at the time of the killings, and later a state police investigator testified that they found $235 hidden in Curtis's headboard. However, a lot of people hide cash in their home. That's not very uncommon, and it doesn't really prove that he stole that money. When the gunshot residue test that was conducted on Curtis came back, the results were positive. The defense's witnesses testified that a few days before the murders happened, Curtis had been shooting off fireworks with his hands, and he had been working on a battery on his truck for days on end before the murders. The gunshot residue was tested by a forensic scientist who testified that the residue found on Curtis was in fact from one particle that was positive for gunshot residue to the exclusion of all other environmental sources. The state had so many witnesses, most of which testified to seeing Curtis, or at least who they thought was Curtis, that day. Patricia Hallman said she saw Curtis many times that morning. She said he was wearing black nylon sweatpants with Fila Grant Hill sneakers, and she went on to say that Curtis and his girlfriend were arguing, and she overheard all of it 3 days before the murders. They were arguing about Curtis's work, according to Patricia. The defense objected to this opinion statement made by Patricia, saying the state was leading the witness. The judge, however, allowed the statement that supported the fact that Patricia heard them arguing, but her opinion that it was about work was not allowed. So the jury was told to disregard the testimony concerning that part. There were 2 men who were in a cell with Curtis in the LaFleur County Jail. They testified that Curtis told them he did commit the murders. One even said that Curtis confessed to him that he stole the money out of the store. We'll definitely come back to these allegations later. A man named Roy Harris was called on by the defense to testify, and he said on the day of the incident he gave Clemmy Fleming a ride to pay her furniture bill at Tardy's. Roy said that before they got there, about 2 blocks away, they saw a man dart across the road around 10 that morning. Clemmy said that it was Curtis Flowers. Curtis's girlfriend, Connie, said on the stand that the policeman came into her home and took a Grant Hill Fila shoebox size 10.5 shoe. She also said that she got a pair of Fila. Curtis's girlfriend, Connie, said on the stand that a policeman came to her home and took a Grant Hill Fila shoebox size 10.5 shoe. She also said she had gotten a pair of Fila shoes the same size for her son, Marcus, and that was around November of 1995. Marcus went to live with his dad in January of 1996, and she was sure that her son took the shoes with him. She hadn't seen those shoes in her house, so she assumed that he took them. She went on to tell the court that when she left to go to work on the morning of the incident, Curtis was at home. Well, it was determined that when these murders occurred, Curtis was the only one living with Connie who allegedly wore a 10.5 shoe. Curtis did take the stand to testify for himself. At 9 in the morning on July 16, 1996, Curtis said that he was just waking up and went to start cooking himself some breakfast. He recalled cutting his hand on a can of shortening. By his accounts, he went over to his sister's house to get a bandage for his hand, and he stayed there for about 15 minutes. Curtis said he wears a size 11 in shoes. On the day of the tragedy, he said he had on a pair of cut-off Tommy Hilfiger shorts, a white Hilfiger shirt, and blue and white Nike shoes. The day before, he was shooting fireworks and was handling car batteries, working on his truck. Curtis said he never leaned on Doyle's car that day, and he never ran anywhere near Tardy's that morning. He also said he never told the 2 inmates that he committed any crime because he was innocent. Curtis had maintained his innocence from the very beginning, so he was shocked that they supposedly lied on him. Cross-examination was pretty nerve-wracking. The state said that Curtis gave 3 statements that didn't add up about the times that he went to his sister's house and the times that he went to the store that day. The state said that he contradicted all of those times. But if you ask me what I did yesterday at 9 in the morning, 12 that afternoon, 3 p.m., I don't know what time I did anything. So I kind of, get it. So you can think you did something at, say, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you think you did it at 9. So they're judging him on 1 to 2 hour differences. I would be totally screwed in this situation as well. The state called on Wayne Miller, the investigator for the Highway Patrol. The investigator stated that he was there when the gunshot residue test was administered. He said he was not the one that conducted the test, which didn't match up with what Curtis said at all. Curtis said Wayne Miller conducted the test. He messed it up so that it had to be done again. During the cross-examination of the investigator, he said he had to exit the room during the test due to getting a phone call, and he was not there for the completion of the test. Now it was time for the jury to deliberate on whether Curtis was guilty or not. The jury concluded that Curtis Flowers was guilty of capital murder in the case of Bertha Tardy. The sentencing phase was the same day. The jury imposed the death penalty, finding 1. The capital offense was committed for monetary gain during an armed robbery. 2. Curtis Flowers knowingly created a great risk of death for many persons. In an attempt to reverse the guilty verdict, the Mississippi Supreme Court said that evidence that the state gave was damaging because it went beyond what was called for to prove without a reasonable doubt the murder of only Bertha. The prosecutor was found to have asked questions not in good faith and without foundation in fact. Both of these reasons were adequate to reverse the verdict, with Curtis incarcerated waiting for retrial. The court stated that what may be harmless error in a case with less at stake becomes reversible error when the penalty is death, and that Curtis's 6th and 14th Amendment rights had been infringed, and the prosecutor repeatedly mentioning the other killings. It was difficult to get a jury that would be fair in Montgomery County, so the second trial, which was for the murder of 16-year-old Derek Stewart, was held in Harrison County. Again, Curtis was found guilty and faced the death penalty. The same thing happened as before. It was reversed by the Mississippi Supreme Court. Again, the prosecutor presented evidence that had nothing to do with Derek's murder, and many errors were made. Keep in mind, in all of these trials is the same prosecutor. The third trial for all 4 murders was on February 12, 2004. Again, Curtis was sentenced to death, and yet again it was reversed, because this time the prosecution's hasty and tyrannical arguments were said to be motivated by Curtis being black. Well, during the jury selection process, it was found that the state opposed black jurors with its first 7 strikes. A Batson challenge was the outcome of this by the defense. Now, the Batson challenge is a valid objection on the grounds that the other party pretty much dismissed jurors due to their race, ethnicity, or gender. This can cause a whole new trial. After the state's submission of non-racial grounds for its reasonings that they used their strikes on those people, the state went on to use its 5 remaining arguments to strike more black jurors. The state also used its 3 other juror strikes on black people. The final jury consisted of 2 black people, but one of them backed out because he was not unbiased. Keep in mind, at the time, the county was 45% black. There were constant issues with the state's treatment of black jurors versus white ones. The state questioned them on who were mostly for the death penalty, which were mainly the white potential jurors in this case, compared to the black potential jurors who were not for the death penalty. The state wanted Curtis dead based on circumstantial evidence. Trial number 4 was in 2007. The prosecution decided not to go for the death sentence, and it ended in a mistrial. The jury was at a 7-5 split in favor of conviction, said to be along racial lines. So, there was a 5th trial. 9 white jurors and 3 black. In 2008, there was another mistrial because their primary juror was not for the conviction. A man named James Bibbs was blamed by the judge of perjury. The judge said that James tried to ruin the jury, saying that he was implying there was evidence planted to convict Curtis. There wasn't a lot of evidence of this, so the case that was going to be against James Bibbs was canceled. Also, there was a juror who did not even know Curtis at all, who was blamed and charged with perjury for lying during jury selection. It was a total mess, to say the least. Next, the 6th trial was held in Winona on June 10th, 2010. The jury consisted of 11 white people and 1 black person. Most potential jurors that were black decided against being a juror because they were either linked to Curtis or his family, or just not for the death penalty. The trial took over a week, and on the 9th day, the jury found Curtis Flowers guilty of capital murder after deliberating for 30 minutes. The sentencing, being the death penalty, took them 90 minutes to decide. The prosecutor, Doug Evans, said, quote, "If anyone deserves the death penalty, Flowers does," end quote. Friends of Justice is a non-profit group by Alan Bean. He was involved in this case and said, quote, "I'm not surprised by the verdict, given the makeup of the jury, but I am a little surprised by the speed," end quote. Friends of Justice takes a close look into cases that are highly suspected of wrongful convictions. On the Friends of Justice blog, Alan said, quote, "I became interested in this case because virtually all the problems that have been leading to wrongful convictions are involved in this case, so I wanted to know how this prosecution was put together," end quote. Allen said first and foremost, there needed to be a jury that exemplified the diversity of Montgomery County. Also, the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit human rights and legal services organization based in Montgomery, Alabama, found that racial discrimination in jury selection is common and seems to be accepted. 2 years of research in 8 southern states, including Mississippi, proved that racially biased use of unconditional strikes and illegal racial discrimination continues to happen in significant criminal cases and capital cases. The Equal Justice Initiative says that the outcome and consequences are that, quote, "all white juries tend to spend less time deliberating, make more errors, and consider fewer perspectives," end quote. Now, anytime race is brought up in the South, people say you're using the race card, which is exactly what people in Winona said, and blamed the Equal Justice Initiative for even inserting themselves. I think people don't like to face the facts, the research that the organizations and others have done, see things from other perspectives. They ignore things or think it's false. Some refuse to just admit they're wrong. I see this all of the time, and someone listening to this right now is probably really pissed, but I'm not going to act like this doesn't still exist. I know the victims' families want justice. I completely empathize with that. I've been there, but there must be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the person accused committed the crime, not just circumstantial evidence. Yes, it's frustrating. We want justice for everyone, but at the same time, we must make sure that we have the right person or people. Sometimes justice takes time, which is aggravating and hard to handle. We can't just accuse who the easiest target is and sentence them to something as serious as death or even life, or sentence them to anything if there's a chance that they are innocent. It's hard to see that when you're in it, but when you're on the outside looking in, it's pretty clear. CNN spoke to a black retired employee of the state, and this man did not want to be named. And he said the absolute truth. Quote, "They don't call you as much. It's not as open as it was, but they still get their ways of keeping you on a different level." End quote. Curtis Flowers was said to be so much like his father. Super chill and loved to sing in the church choir. Shooting anyone or even harming someone was not something Curtis Flowers would do, and everyone, not just family members either, said that Curtis was a gentle, kind man. He also had a clean record. The man had never committed a crime in his life. There was no reason for him to go shoot up the place that morning. In Mississippi, if you leave a gun in your vehicle and it can be seen, or if someone knows that you carry a gun around in your glove compartment, and your car is unlocked and somebody in that area passes by and rambles through your car, they're capable of stealing that gun. Just because Curtis was related to the person who it was stolen from doesn't mean that he stole the gun. Do you know how many people in Mississippi probably have residue on their hands every day? Not just from guns, but as Curtis said, handling car batteries, fireworks, many things. The gun that was used was not recovered, the state claims. However, later, you may find out a little different. But there was no sign at all of Curtis being there. Circumstantial evidence just does not cut it. Eyewitnesses also cannot be relied on because people can easily be misidentified. In 2019, it had been more than 20 years that Curtis had been fighting to prove his innocence. Being tried 6 times is highly unusual, according to Cornell Law School professor John Bloom. Quote, "I'm not aware of any other capital defendant in what we call the modern era who has been tried 6 times." End quote. So, even though Curtis had maintained his innocence the whole time, 3 inmates came forward saying that Curtis told them that he committed the murders, but later, on tape, they took back their statements. Now keep in mind, people who are incarcerated will do whatever they think they need to, and sometimes they are coerced into doing things to get their sentences reduced. Also in 2018, Dr. Michael Baden, a respected pathologist, said evidence he studied of the murders did suggest that there were multiple people who committed this quadruple murder. After Dr. Michael Baden went over the autopsy reports and crime scene photos, he said the evidence indicates one person remained in control of the employees while another person carried out the execution-style shootings, saying, quote, "Usually if somebody starts shooting, others will run," end quote. All of the bodies were pretty close together except Bertha's, but she was still close in proximity. She didn't get far. One day in 2001, a resident of Winona, Jeffrey Armstrong, his mother was renting a home on Knox Street, only about 700 feet away from Tardy's. She heard her dog Patches barking away. So Jeffrey went outside to see what in the world was going on. Patches was having a fit, looking in the crawl space. This led to Jeffrey discovering a .380 caliber gun. It was rusty and covered in dirt. When he saw it, he thought of the Tardy Furniture killings, recalling that law enforcement had never found the murder weapon, but he remembered the bullets were from a .380 caliber handgun. Jeffrey took the gun and put it into a shed by his mom's house. It wasn't long after he found the gun when 2 police officers happened to pull him over for speeding in October of 2001. While he and the officers were talking, he told them about what he found. Quote, "Look, I've got something y'all need to get," end quote. He said that he suspected it was the gun that was used in the Tardy Furniture shootings. Later, Jeffrey said that one of the officers, Vince Small, came by and he handed Vince the gun. After some time had gone by, Jeffrey did not know what happened with the gun. When Curtis went back on trial, the gun was never mentioned at all, and Jeffrey started to recall when Vince Small took the gun. The policeman didn't mark it or put it into an evidence bag. The police never even searched the crawl space under the house where it was found. So, Vince Small claimed that Jeffrey never gave a gun to him at all. Jeffrey could not believe this. Vince and Jeffrey went to high school together from the age of 5 until they graduated high school, and even attended boot camp together. This hurt Jeffrey's feelings. He said he wasn't angry, he was just hurt. Jeffrey said that an officer told him the gun had been sent to the state crime lab, and they concluded that this .380 handgun was not the murder weapon. The officer who was with Vince Small when they pulled Jeffrey over for speeding said to APM reports that Jeffrey had given them a gun, which was given to the DA's office. Funnily enough, officials at the crime lab said they never received a gun. Therefore, no gun was ever tested, like the officer told Jeffrey it had been. Lo and behold, the DA's office did not comment. It would not be until 2016 when defense lawyers finally took a closer look at Jeffrey's statement that he had found the .380 handgun. At a hearing, the Attorney General's office told the judge that prosecutors had no idea of any gun at all. Something else interesting came to light that I was reading in the Clarion Ledger. There was a gang that was from Alabama, and this kind of shooting lined up to what they usually did. And they also used a .380 caliber pistol, which sometimes jammed. Which brings me back to the bullet, the live round that was found by the bookshelf that I talked about in the beginning of the episode. So that bullet on the ground indicated that the gun had probably been jammed. Also, this one gang member wore Grant Hill Filas. In 1996, Alabama was seeing this happen a lot. The criminals told store workers to lie down and held them at gunpoint, sometimes killing them. Marcus Presley, one of the offenders in the Alabama gang, said in a sworn statement to Curtis's lawyers that 2 of his accomplices in the Alabama crimes were in fact in Mississippi at the time of the Tardy murders. One of the men, LaSamuel Gamble, went back to Alabama with more money than what he had arrived in Mississippi with. Marcus said, quote, "Gamble told me they saw a few licks where they were in Mississippi. By licks he meant places to rob." End quote. The Tardy Furniture murders took place during a 24-day gap when these men committed no robberies or crimes in Alabama. 8 days before the murders, someone robbed the furniture store. According to the July 8, 1996 police report, store owner Bertha reported to police that a robber or multiple robbers smashed through a skylight, tried to break into the safe, and stole the side door key. It's highly possible that the killer or killers could have used the key to come into the store by way of the side door, maybe even hiding inside before the store opened. Front Street was usually a busy place. Would it not make more sense that the killers would have darted out of the store through the side door rather than running out of the front door onto busy Front Street, as they claimed Curtis did? The side door even opened to a ditch that would have given the killers a much better way to escape than waltzing through town as authorities claimed Curtis had done. A suspect at the beginning of the investigation named Willie James Hemphill, who has a long rap sheet, lived less than a mile from Jeffrey's mother's house, where the gun was found. Not long after the murders, police arrested Willie Hemphill, who was 24 years old at the time, and he was wearing a pair of Grant Hill Fila shoes. He spent 11 days in jail, then the authorities released him. Apparently, Grant Hill Fila shoes were obviously popular around Winona at the time, or maybe other places as well. But that's one of the main things they wanted to pin this on Curtis Flowers for, because he wore a close enough size of a Grant Hill Fila to the faint shoe print they found. Willie had given an alibi for the time of the murders, but when the podcast In the Dark started to dig deep into the case, they concluded that Willie's alibi was hardly credible. Prosecutor Doug Evans' office never let the defense team know any of this, which is a Brady violation. Now, a Brady violation is the unconstitutional withholding of evidence favorable to the accused. Willie Hemphill is now, or was, living in Indianapolis. Jeffrey said he never even suspected Curtis was guilty from the beginning. Quote, "I knew his sisters. I knew his brother. I knew Curtis had started getting involved in crack. I ain't saying nothing bad. It happens. But he didn't bother anybody." End quote. Psychologist John R. Goff tested Curtis, finding his IQ was 75. Jeffrey questioned whether Curtis could have killed 4 people execution style. The psychologist said he would not have had the mental capability. Curtis's uncle Doyle Simpson has since passed away, but there were some odd things that came out when it was a little too late. It was found out that Doyle had actually been absent from work that morning for 30 to 40 minutes, around the time the murders would have taken place. It's suspected that whoever killed these 4 wonderful people had some kind of inside information, and Doyle used to work there too. During the 6th trial of Curtis Flowers, an inmate named Odell Howman testified that Curtis told him about carrying out the Tardy murders, which is what helped Curtis get convicted. And afterwards, Odell admitted that he lied. Odell ended up telling APM reports in an interview on a contraband cell phone from his prison cell, quote, "As far as him telling me he killed some people, hell no, he ain't ever told me that. That was a lie. It was all make-believe. A bunch of lies." End quote. Odell said that he became a witness for the state in the spring of 2001, right after he was taken into custody on many drug charges. He said that while he was in jail, he talked to officers about Curtis's case, and Odell saw a glimpse of regaining his freedom and future. An investigation into Odell's criminal history revealed that at least 7 felony charges against him fell away between 2001 and 2016. Following his release in 2013 from prison, Odell tried to run over a Carroll County Sheriff's deputy while he was on the run from a drug bust. His case was put off for more than 2 years. Odell had murdered 3 people, including his ex-girlfriend, Marquita Hill, and her mother. He also tried to shoot his own 12-year-old son, who was hiding in a closet, and thankfully the boy survived. Odell Howman is now serving 3 life sentences in Parchment without the chance of parole. On July 14, 2018, Curtis's mother, Lola, who always believed in her son, passed away from complications during a surgery. The judge would not even let Curtis go to his mother's funeral that was held a few days later. His father, Archie, and his son kept the faith that Curtis would one day be free. Archie Flowers said, quote, "I know he didn't do it. The truth's gonna come out." End quote. In December of 2019, a circuit judge in Winona freed Curtis after he paid his bond. There's a podcast I mentioned earlier called In the Dark that greatly helped Curtis Flowers, and the information revealed on the podcast was even cited as a reason to let him out. Now the question was, would there be a 7th trial? But for now, finally, Curtis was a free man who was so excited to be with his family to go get some fried fish after being locked away for over 20 years. He said, quote, "I feel good right now. I'm happy." End quote. Beside Curtis were his sisters Priscilla Ward and Sharita Baskin, and they had their arms linked with his. Curtis said he was looking forward to spending Christmas with his family for the first time in decades. Quote, "I'm so excited right now. I can't even think straight." End quote. They were all smiles, and you could tell he really didn't know what to say, but he didn't need to say much because his face said it all. He was glowing. Matt Steffi, a law professor at the Mississippi College School of Law in Jackson, had been closely keeping up with the case, and sometimes he would even talk about it with his class. He said, quote, "The case against Curtis Flowers has always been exceptionally weak. They don't have the murder weapon, they don't have an eyewitness, they don't have forensic evidence of any quality that a neutral observer would violate, I don't think." End quote. On January 6th, District Attorney Doug Evans asked to be formally removed from the case. He also asked that the State Attorney General's office take it over. At that time, supposing the judge granted the DA's request, Matt Steffi said there were quite a few ways the Attorney General's office, which was led by newly elected Republican Attorney General Lynn Fitch, could respond. Matt said, quote, "She could say, 'Gee, while we still stand by our work and while we believe Mr. Flowers is guilty, we believe the case has degraded over time to where we can't secure a conviction and dismiss the case.'" End quote. On the other side of that coin, Matt said the Attorney General could attempt to cut Curtis a deal, such as if Curtis pleaded guilty to one or more of the charges, in return he wouldn't have to serve any more jail time. Matt said, quote, "Now that he's out on bail, and now that he has excellent lawyers backed by deeper pockets than he has ever had, I don't know how tempting he would find that offer." End quote. A 7th trial was an option, but whoever presented this case to the court would have to be prepared for the defense to bring up the podcast reporter's discoveries, which would basically be the state burying themselves. Matt said, quote, "There's no one for whom this is a satisfying outcome. I think that invites us to look at the way we conduct the criminal justice system and, in particular, leaving these questions up to a single elected official over such a long period of time." End quote. Some of the victims' relatives and others in Winona still believe Curtis is guilty and should be punished for what they have been convinced he has done with no solid evidence. Which I don't blame them. I don't think it's their fault. All they know is that Curtis was the person that was put on trial. They've had so much drilled into their heads over flimsy circumstantial evidence and he was the one that supposedly committed this heinous crime. They had no one else to essentially put the blame and their anger on. As I've said, I know loved ones want justice. We all do. We must be sure, though, 100%, that we're not putting someone innocent away for life or sentencing them to death. The state decided that they were not going to prosecute Curtis Flowers for a 7th time, and they dropped all the charges against him on September 4th, 2020. The Attorney General's office specified that it would be pretty much a hopeless effort to try to get Curtis convicted due to the absence of any living witnesses who had not retracted or made their testimony useless because they've made many statements that didn't match up. Plus, the identification of different suspects and evidence that would only make it more obvious that Curtis wasn't the one at fault for this awful crime. The case against Curtis was dismissed with prejudice, banning any additional prosecution, and the case was formally closed. In March of 2021, the state of Mississippi awarded Curtis Flowers $500,000, the maximum allowed in the state in compensation for his wrongful conviction and being locked up for over 20 years. Curtis would be compensated in $50,000 payments over the next 10 years. Unfortunately, we may never know who murdered those people at the Tardy Furniture store that day. Of course, I hope we do. What I do highly believe is that this man, Curtis Flowers, was pinned for it with no substantial evidence, tried 6 times because the prosecutor did not want any black jurors if he could help it, and the 20-plus years that was taken from this man with no evidence is so unbelievable. Now, I have not yet listened to the In the Dark podcast, but I certainly will, and I want to thank them for bringing light to so many things that helped Curtis become a free man. If you haven't listened to the podcast either, I suggest that we all do sometime soon, because I've become completely engulfed in this story that has taken me a week to try to sum up as best as I could without making it a series. But I want to learn even more. There's audio out there of Curtis speaking and the inmate Odell, who told the In the Dark podcast that he lied about Curtis. That's the one video I did see in one of my sources. It was used in court and it blew me away. Odell also lied when he said he wasn't offered a deal to lie on Curtis as well. That all came out. I cannot imagine having someone I love murdered and not knowing who did it. I can see how relatives and other loved ones of the victims do believe Curtis did it. I may not agree, but I can understand it. The person you care about so much has just been killed, and you're sitting there listening to the prosecution and practically being manipulated to believe that this man is guilty. But in that fog, you probably can't see there isn't any real solid proof. I don't blame that on the relatives or loved ones at all. I can't say how I would feel in their shoes. However, looking at it from the outside in, it's easier to assess the situation and how this case against Curtis should have never happened. Everyone at the time seemed to be wearing the same type of shoes, and he had 1 particle of gun residue on his hand. You had eyewitnesses that claimed they saw him here and there that morning, but misidentification happens a lot with eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses are like polygraph tests. You have to take those with a grain of salt. Take, for example, do you ever see someone out in public and you wave because you think it's someone you know, and you're positive it's them, but it turns out you're waving at someone who just looks a lot like them, and then you're kind of like, whoops, you're not who I thought you were? That's kind of like what eyewitnesses can be. I hope there is justice for all 4 of the victims one day. I hope that the victims' families can find some kind of peace somehow. This isn't easy for the loved ones, and I'm completely aware of that. And if you need help to deal with the grief that you've been feeling for all of these years, please get that help. We can't always do it alone. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and until next time, please stay safe and take care of yourselves.